This week's episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 3rd of May 2023 at home in Wicklow. The 3rd of May. It's my niece's birthday and my sister-in-law's birthday. So I will say straight away, even though this isn't normally a place where I would say such things, I will say happy birthday Una and happy birthday Sarah. Neither of whom are probably listening to this, but on the off chance. Okay, so this week's episode recorded under duress, insofar as I was ill. I am ill, you can hear it. And I started recording the episode under the proviso that I might have to abandon and just put in place something pre-recorded. In the end, I persevered. Now, you're in for a treat if you like Star Wars. And if you don't, you can stop listening right now. It's okay. It's okay. It's grand. Keep moving. I thought I was only going to talk about Star Wars briefly. Very, very briefly. Because, of course, it is. This episode is out on May the 4th. As in, May the 4th be with you. But I just kept going. And going. And going. And yeah, that became the episode. So that's what's coming up. Me talking about Star Wars, my relationship to Star Wars, why I believe I'm not a nerd, a Star Wars nerd or a comic book nerd. I talk about why I believe these characters, these worlds connect with us at a certain time in our lives. I look at the careers of some of the main actors in Star Wars and talk about them in the context of the other Star Wars movies, which are far less successful, and why I think that is. Yes, and that's kind of it. So, I mean, there's reflections on childhood, nostalgia, Star Wars figures, hero worship, idolatry, going to the movies, and recognising the things that are important, or recognising the things that were very important when I was a kid. That's a question always worth asking. You know, what's important to you now? Is Star Wars important to you now? Probably not, because you could be in your 60s or 70s. Maybe it's really important to you because you're in your 60s or your 70s. I don't know. Anyway, that's what's coming up. It's a bit of a Star Wars fest. So if that's your thing, get ready. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Okay? I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind. Leaving the dream behind. Keep my moji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. How are you? How's the form? How's she cutting? Are you well? Now, if you're in any way observant, you'll notice that I have a cold, and I'm potentially going to cut this episode very short, and instead of doing what I usually do and improvising an hour to an hour and 20 minutes of free form positing and expostulating and holding forth on a couple of key ideas, I may end up just inserting something pre-recorded, but I may not. We'll see. We'll see how we get on. My fear is when you listen to a voice, a compromised voice like mine is at the moment, and it's more that my nose is compromised rather than my voice. It puts us off. We have a natural aversion that the energy of the voice will perhaps drag us down. I was in the car this morning. I was driving up to the north side of Dublin to help a friend cut down a tree, and basically I was the monkey on the ground picking up the coconuts for the other monkey who was at the top of the tree, throwing them down. But I often listen to podcasts when I'm driving. I'll stick my earbuds in and have a podcast in my ears. But my regular podcasts, I'd listened to them already this week, and I decided, no, I'll just either put on the radio or put on some music. Now, I wasn't feeling well. I've been sick for the last few days. And I thought, I don't know if I can handle music. So I'll just put on the radio. And I put on a news station. And I lasted about 3 minutes. And I had to turn it off. It just felt like the production, the deliberate decisions with the various jingles, the cadence of the voices of the presenters. I just had to turn it off, and I haven't seen the data, or the data, if you prefer. I think podcasts have really eaten into radio listenership, because many people are sick of the radio. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say there aren't still, many great radio programs and stations to listen to, but a lot of radio really isn't that hot. So yeah, I just had to turn it off, and I travelled in silence, and I travelled home in silence as well. Yeah, so the connection there, if you didn't work it out, was the wrong sounds coming in our ears can put us off. It's very simple, and it's nice to spend time with a voice you like listening to. And I hope, I live in hope. I never live in expectation. I live in hope. I live in hope that mine is a voice you can tolerate for the rest of this episode. And no doubt I'll be back to my normal, less foghorny timbre this time next week. Anyway, I'm proceeding with that note of caution. So don't be surprised if I decide to cry off a little bit earlier than normal and put something else in. As I said, I may not. So what was I planning to talk about today? Well, the day of release of this episode happens to be International Star Wars Day, because it's May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. My youngest brother sent me that in a text 2 or 3 years ago. May the 4th be with you. And I hadn't a clue what he was on about. I didn't get it at all. And really, that was somewhat ironic, because of the 4 brothers, the 4 sons in the family, I was the only one who was a true Star Wars fan. Because it came along and it was right in my wheelhouse. I was but a child. Well, if you think about it, Star Wars came out in 1977. And in fact, listen, before I go any further, let me just apologise right now, because I'm going to inflict on you a little bit of my Star Wars fandom. And as ever, I am in no way exceptional. In fact, I am pathetically commonplace and unoriginal in being a Gen X white male who loves Star Wars. But I was just about to take you through the corresponding ages for the release dates of the first 3 Star Wars movies, which were 1977, which was the original Star Wars that we all know and love. Followed in 1980 by The Empire Strikes Back, and that trilogy was brought to a a very satisfying conclusion in 1983 with The Return of the Jedi. And so the corresponding ages for me, I was 3 in 1977. Now, I really don't believe I saw it in 1977. I do remember seeing it in the cinema. I do remember seeing it in the cinema before I saw The Empire Strikes Back. So perhaps it was a re-release. Perhaps I saw it in, I don't know, 78, 79. It would have been 4 or 5. And it made a massive impression on me. And of course I saw the other films in the cinema as well. And I don't really think I have anything that I can say about Star Wars or add to the Star Wars fan conversation that hasn't been said by a million other people before me, probably in far more fanatical, obsessive detail, perhaps more articulately than I could hope to do. So I won't spend long on this, but I do feel, because the episode is coming out on May the 4th, that I should talk about it briefly. And I may have spoken about this briefly last year, because my wife and daughter and I went to a concert in the National Concert Hall in Dublin of John Williams's Star Wars music, and it was absolutely fantastic. I was absolutely enthralled and completely sent time travelling back to my wide-eyed, wondrous youth when the Star Wars theme struck up. If you caught that episode last year, the conductor came out in full Darth Vader costume and conducted the opening music, fully clothed as such. He must have been absolutely roasting. When he removed the helmet, his head looked like a beetroot, a sweating, wet beetroot. But that was fantastic. And so I can't remember if I spoke about Star Wars lore or my relationship to it last year. But I'm going to just indulge myself briefly here. I was thinking about it earlier today, and because I was considering whether I'd bother talk about it on the episode, and I suppose the conclusion I came to really was there may have been nothing more important in my life than Star Wars at that time. And there was something about the way those characters and that story captured my imagination and opened up this sense of awe and wonder in me, and hero worship. Hero worship, a form of, I was going to use the word idolatry, but I mean that's probably right though, isn't it? I mean, idolizing, particularly idolizing Harrison Ford's character Han Solo, and in a more reserved way Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker. But there was something so archetypally pure about the storytelling. No accident, of course, but this idea of pitting the sort of noble, self-sacrificing, undermanned, underpowered, underfinanced good guys against the kind of the totalitarian, soulless, heartless, ruthless killing machine that was the Empire, and the Empire's chief lieutenant of darkness was Darth Vader, and he represented the dark side of the Force, the mystical Force, and Luke Skywalker became an apprentice Jedi Knight and represented the good side of the Force. And so we're invited into this dichotomy of the human soul, the battle between good and evil. And I suppose the spiritual premise of the Star Wars mythology is that this mystical force lights up the entire universe, and it can be used for good or for ill. And certain individuals are more disposed to harnessing and utilizing the Force than others, and are singled out for a particular attention or training or for destruction. And this was enormously tantalizing God, it seemed for everyone, because it was such an extraordinary smash hit. But I think for kids particularly, there was something about this kind of this mythos that George Lucas created and imposed on his creations that resonated so deeply. Now, I say resonate. It's not that I had a reference point or any sort of recognition, but it just seemed to be so. It seemed to speak to something that was incredibly powerful and believable and very humbling, humanizing, something that made you feel, okay, there are these big forces in the world and they can be overwhelming and they can ruin everything that is good, and it's going to take particular individuals to resist in the face of all temptations to do otherwise, in the face of their own fears and self-doubts. And that, I suppose ultimately what that comes back to is the powerful, resonant, archetypal story and characters, and how they, through all kinds of different mythologies, through the history of literature and storytelling, speak to us and speak to people. Now, it's interesting if you take that, the success of that in the first three movies, and then think of how far less successful that was with the subsequent Star Wars movies, the sort of the prequels that came out in the early 2000s, which I don't think I'm not even sure if I've seen the three of them. I found them really disappointing. And then the sort of the not really a reboot, but the subsequent chapters of the story that came out in the last, I think the first one was in 2011, so God, it's 12 years already, which sort of brought those stories to a conclusion. And again, those last three episodes of the Star Wars saga were more successful, but still very flawed. And there was a loss of clarity in the storytelling, and you just find yourself watching those movies and scratching your head a bit and thinking, well, what were they thinking? What were the writers thinking? What was the director thinking? Why aren't these stories as clear and clean as the original three movies? And I think one of the reasons is, storytelling through film has changed, and also the pressure of fans on the directors and writers who take on the continuation of these stories. The pressure of fans has become even greater, and can have I think from a film studio point of view, can have a huge influence on the success or failure of a movie. And so maybe directors and writers try to second guess what the fans want, and it's a truism of writing that you should always write for yourself, not for the audience. What do you think? I mean, I think that's how you get true voice, because the second you start altering or doctoring or modifying or curating what you're saying for the audience, it's a step or two or three or four or five or six removed from your own first impulse, your own vision, your own voice, and I think that's what you get. So even though the subsequent movies, maybe from a special effects point of view, are more impressive, maybe from a pacing point of view, slightly different pace, maybe faster. I don't know. I haven't sat down and compared them. But I may have mentioned in the past, when I first showed my daughter Star Wars when she was, 4 or 5, maybe 6, maybe 5, she lapped it up. And it held her attention from start to finish in a way a lot of other modern films weren't doing. And that is the strength of the story and the clarity of the story. And of course, I've always been aware of a parallel between the Force and Jedi Knights, and martial arts, and the sort of idea of the ascetic, disciplined, cool-headed, cool-blooded warrior who has mastered their craft and uses it judiciously in the pursuit of justice and in defense of those who can't defend themselves, which, a very idealistic interpretation of traditional martial arts philosophies, but it's there. It's there. And when you look at the sort of the tenets, the principles of traditional martial arts, all those ideas are in there. Mastering one's self, controlling one's emotions, not striking first, discipline, etiquette, respect, they're all in there. They're all in the mix. But anyway, I didn't know that as a kid. What I did know was that Han Solo was so cool and funny, but cool, and just the guy you wanted to be. And Luke Skywalker was just so full of potential. He just had these awesome powers that you were waiting to see, waiting for him to realize his full potential. And that came to fruition very dramatically in The Return of the Jedi, which, to be honest with you, is the weakest of the three films. But as a kid, it was the perfect ending, because Luke Skywalker is suddenly a badass from being the sort of, windswept desert surfer dude who just wants to have an adventure in the first Star Wars movie, to the apprentice who is beginning to grasp the enormity of the task in front of him in The Empire Strikes Back, and who leaves his training impetuously, impulsively, which we know isn't going to go well. And The Empire Strikes Back is, it packs a punch. It's a real downer, and the big revelation where Luke Skywalker, spoiler alert, but this is from 43 years ago. The big revelation that Luke Skywalker, when he's having his big duel with Darth Vader at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, and Darth Vader tells him that he's his father, and he doesn't believe it, and we don't want to believe it, and it's brilliant. It's high drama. The epitome of Luke Skywalker's worst fears. And I remember when I watched that as a kid, just feeling, oh, this is suddenly got very grown up. This is some serious stuff happening here. And that wasn't the scariest part of The Empire Strikes Back for me. But the scariest part was when Luke Skywalker is in the swamp on, I'm going to go blank on the name of the planet, wherever Yoda, the Jedi Master, lives, and Yoda who's trying to teach him the ways of the Jedi, the ways of the Force, and Luke Skywalker has to go into this sort of hollow, swampy, gacky, yucky, stinky cave-like opening in the swamp to face his biggest enemy, his biggest fear. And in there he sees Darth Vader, and he has a lightsaber duel with him and smashes his mask off. But when he looks down, the mask reveals Luke Skywalker's own face. Dun dun dun. Very Freudian. And that was the scariest part for me. I remember just being freaked out by that as a kid and going, oh, I'm not sure what. So I was six or seven then when I saw that. It all just felt incredibly ominous. And when the movie ends and we know Han Solo has been taken away, frozen in a carbon chamber by the evil bounty hunter Boba Fett, betrayed by his friend Lando Calrissian. Luke Skywalker's had his arm chopped off, and he's just wondering, what the hell are we going to do next? You're just going, oh my god, what the hell? Don't leave us waiting. And then you have one of the great opening sections of a movie at the start of Return of the Jedi, like that whole entire opening sequence where Luke Skywalker comes to the lair of Jabba the Hutt, who has the frozen Han Solo as a trophy, and we discover has Princess Leia as a dancing girl with a chain around her neck, and Luke Skywalker goes in, and we get signs of his power, his mastery of the Force, and we're going, okay, this is not the Luke Skywalker from The Empire Strikes Back. This guy is going to kick some ass, and you're just thrilled. I remember being thrilled and going, this is unbelievable. And the rescue goes pear-shaped, we think. But ultimately, Luke Skywalker and his team triumph. They rescue Han Solo, who's blinded from having been in the chamber, temporarily blinded. And there's a great battle on this sort of mini, multi-person carrier that's about to take Han Solo and the rebels and throw them into the Sarlacc pit, this disgusting pit with with teeth and tentacles that's going to devour them. But Luke Skywalker does some groovy Jedi stuff, and everyone, all the good guys kick ass, and it's great. And then the rest of the movie, so. And then there's a great battle at the end with Luke Skywalker and the Emperor, who really is evil and scary. And am I right? I mean, I just kind of lost interest. Just as you may have in my rapid summary of the Star Wars movies. But is the Emperor meant to be? Is it Palpatine? Is he the politician who's interested in? Oh, I can't even remember how boring it was, like gerrymandering or tax laws in the galaxy in the prequels that came out many years later. Holy hell, they got that one so wrong. But if you rewatch The Return of the Jedi, what's interesting is watch it and be quite focused on how much Harrison Ford has to do in that movie, and you will be surprised at how peripheral a character Han Solo is in Return of the Jedi. He's just there to kind of crack some jokes and be the sort of confused, jilted lover of Princess Leia, because he realizes he's tapped into something, that there's some special connection between Leia and Luke. Okay, spoiler alert again, they're brother and sister. But Han Solo feels he's been spurned by Princess Leia, and it doesn't go down well. So he's kind of pouting and sulking for the latter part of the movie. It really isn't great. It really isn't great. But when I was 9, my daughter's age now, I just thought it was the absolute business. I thought it was fantastic, and something, I wouldn't have articulated it as such, but the poetic closing of the trilogy, where Luke Skywalker makes peace with his father and Darth Vader comes to his rescue in his battle with the Emperor, it just all felt lovely. And he just felt cool. Everything's good. It's nearly a half an hour gone, and I said I wasn't going to spend long on this, but yeah, there you go. I've never been very good at editing. The thing I was thinking about, which I referred to earlier, was this idea of what was important to you. Like, if you go back and you think, what was important to you, and why fantasy and heroes and fictional creations might be so significant to us when we're children, why we have that relationship to fictional creations. And it really is, it's so dependent on what the thing is at the time. I mean, really, yeah, that's it. Why does something resonate in a way that it won't have at another time? I remember coming to Star Trek at some point on TV, the series. Now, I can't remember if that was around a similar time. I thought, okay, well, this is science fiction, that should be good. It's like Star Wars. And Star Trek simply isn't like Star Wars. It's a very, very different beast. And it's, how would you distinguish the two? There was a tone, I come back to tone. There was a tone to Star Trek that simply wasn't that sexy compared to Star Wars. It didn't have the wow factor that Star Wars had. And of course, the Star Wars, it was movies, and the arcs were much more impressive. The character arcs were much more impressive. Luke Skywalker going from the beginning of Star Wars, trying to buy worker droids for his uncle, to being the guy in the X-Wing fighter that blows up the Death Star at the end. That's a great arc. And being on, just beginning to discover the Force and beginning to feel what he's capable of. That's a great arc. And Star Trek, there was something much more lo-fi. And I don't know, when I think of the two now, and you think of the creators, you think of Gene Roddenberry, about whom I know virtually nothing, And in fact, I should remove the virtually and just say about whom I know nothing other than he was the creator of Star Trek. And you think of George Lucas. Both of them created these worlds. They created these characters. And they created very vivid characters and very, now I was going to say believable worlds. Can you say that about science fiction? Is it believable? Consistent, credible, fascinating, colourful, well thought out, logical worlds. I think that's fair to say that. But Star Trek tonally had something very different going on, and maybe that's because it was the 60s, wasn't it? Wasn't Star Trek the 60s? And it has that sort of 60s vibe to it. And maybe it's the studio sets and the special effects. And Star Wars, when it came along, was just like, oh my goodness, this is a whole other level. Now, if you'd gone from Star Trek to Star Wars, I don't know what that journey was. I don't know what that transition was. And if people were like, I don't know if people left Star Trek for Star Wars and never went back. Because, of course, you get enormously dedicated fans of both worlds. But as a kid of my age, it was going to be the other way around. It would have been Star Wars first, and then catching up with the Star Trek episodes, like reruns on TV. And then subsequently the Star Trek films. I think I've only ever seen one Star Trek film in the cinema. And that was much, much later in the Star Trek series. And then it was like the Next Generation in the early 90s when Star Trek The Next Generation came on, and Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard was such a beguiling character, and just brilliantly played by Patrick Stewart. And he brought, well, what I felt, he just brought this kind of gravitas to that role and that series. And that for me, for a while, certainly around 1990, 1991, that was just must-watch TV. In a way I never felt about William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and the others who starred in the original Star Trek series. Now, speaking of William Shatner, there's a great, great episode of Lawrence Krauss's Origins podcast, which was out earlier this week, which features a lengthy, I don't know if you could call it an interview. It's a conversation between Lawrence Krauss, the host, and William Shatner. And one of the things that's remarkable about that, I was saying it to a friend, is how young William Shatner sounds, because I think he's 92. And Lawrence Krauss is about to be 70, and he also sounds really young. And basically the conversation is just them talking science and physics and astrophysics and relativity and quarks. And I'm about to run out of my physics vocabulary. It's a very entertaining listen, and if you can follow it, or if you have any sort of grounding in these things, it's probably quite educational. I didn't feel like I knew any more about science afterwards. Sorry. And I couldn't have known less to begin with. But that is, highly recommended, just for the warmth and humour of the conversation, the fun that William Shatner brings to it. I highly recommend you listen to that. Okay, so look, I do want to kind of, I didn't answer my own question. I didn't answer my own question about why these things resonate. Like Harry Potter, for example. Harry Potter. I couldn't give a fig about Harry Potter. No interest. None whatsoever. Now, you know from a previous episode, I am interested in the J.K. Rowling controversy in terms of how she's found herself in the, very hot, the volcanically hot and controversial centre of the culture wars and has been vilified and held up as a figure of hate by the LGBTQ and community, particularly the trans community. I remain unconvinced about how justified that anger is, but I also remain I probably remain insufficiently informed. But again, you can revisit my episode on that, which I did towards the end of last year. But yeah, Harry Potter and the Harry Potter universe, the Harry Potter world, no interest. I picked up the first book once. I lasted about 10 pages and I was like, nah, not for me. And then the movies, I couldn't get through the first, however long was the first one. And that's a barometer for me. I often will go into a bookshop and pick up a book and I'll read the first few pages and that's it. If the first few pages get me, it's worth getting. And if they don't, see you later. It's very simple. I tried watching recently the Bradley Cooper sexy chef movie, Burnt. And again, I don't think I got past 5 minutes. I thought it was absolutely unwatchable. It was just... I don't know. I'm struggling to articulate how utterly crap I felt it was going to be, and I felt it was. Those first few minutes I watched, there was nothing original about it at all. There was nothing. I don't even know if that's the thing, because it doesn't have to be original, does it? Like a genre movie doesn't have to be original. It can just be done well. But that script, what he was given to say, how they were setting up his character, it was just terrible. Just squeezing in this kind of exposition, and we were meant to care about him. And I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going to care about this guy. I'm out. And see, that's something you couldn't say about Han Solo or Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia, even Chewbacca, even C-3PO and R2-D2, even Darth Vader. You cared about these characters. Obi-Wan Kenobi, you cared about these characters because they brought humanity. Even Darth Vader, as scary as he was, brought humanity. The James Earl Jones voice work captured something of that moral struggle within Darth Vader as he got to know Luke Skywalker better. And they were compelling characters. And because you cared about those characters, you were very interested to see what else they were doing subsequently. And subsequently, I don't think I've seen a single thing Mark Hamill did. I'm aware he did the voice of the Joker in the animated Batman series, again going back to the sort of the 90s and 2000s. I don't think I've seen him in a single thing. Did he turn up in a Jay and Silent Bob movie? I think he did. One of the Kevin Smith movies, which I think was a riff on Star Wars anyway, because it was like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I think Mark Hamill turns up at the end of that. Sort of, he seems to have been a great sport over the years at sort of poking fun at himself. But yeah, I didn't look at his filmography after Return of the Jedi. Harrison Ford just had this extraordinary time and made so many good movies through the 80s. And you can see, if you go look at his filmography, like he did a couple of other movies around the same time as Star Wars. He had a small role in Apocalypse Now, as an officer in one of the early meetings with Martin Sheen, when Martin Sheen has been given his mission to go and take out Colonel Kurtz. He did a comedy western called The Frisco Kid with Gene Wilder, which I remember liking that a lot as a kid. He must have done American Graffiti and I think even was in the sequel, more American Graffiti around that time as well. But then it kicked on. And of course he started doing the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones movies at the same time as the Star Wars movies. But then went on to do Witness and The Mosquito Coast and Frantic, Working Girl. These are all good movies. And I'm trying to think. Presumed Innocent, 1990. I'm just pulling these out of my head at the moment. And he was doing well. I'm trying to think. It probably started to go cold when he did Regarding Henry, where he played like the angry, the sort of yuppie, Gordon Gekko-esque legal guy who is he's mugged or caught up in a mugging or caught up in a hold up in a shop and basically has a head injury. And when he wakes up from his head injury, he's all nice and sweet and kind of doe-eyed. I'm not sure how well that movie ages. And then, I don't know, the hits really did. He did all the Tom Clancy stuff. Jack Ryan, wasn't it? Clear and Present Danger, Patriot Games. Even though he was a huge Harrison Ford fan, I didn't really go for that stuff. What Lies Beneath was good. That felt like a return to form. That must have been the late 90s, was it? And then just nothing for so long. Just loads of duds. And then people started talking about him in The Age of Adeline, where he played like the older, the love interest of this time-travelling woman played by Blake Lively, who she doesn't age, and then she comes across him. He was a lover from when she was younger, and now he's an older man. It's Harrison Ford. I remember people going, "Oh, Harrison Ford's great in this," and I was like, "Yeah, wow, you're so desperate for a charismatic leading man of real quality that Harrison Ford, basically being Harrison Ford, gets you all gooey-eyed again." And the same was true when he turned up towards the end of the Blade Runner sequel. I forgot to mention Blade Runner before, and that great run of movies. Blade Runner was 82, wasn't it? So just before Return of the Jedi. Oh man, so many great Harrison Ford movies. Yeah, and then of course he turned up in the more recent Star Wars movies. I won't tell you how that ended. And Carrie Fisher, here's a funny one, right? So Carrie Fisher, obviously the daughter of Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, and kind of followed her mum into entertainment. And she'd been in Shampoo, a movie I hadn't seen when I was watching the Star Wars movies. I didn't really know about it until later. Carrie Fisher, again, not someone I would have really... I wasn't following her career too closely, but I remember seeing her in When Harry Met Sally and thinking, oh wow, cool, there's Carrie Fisher. Look at her all grown up and doing, some real grown-up funny acting in this kind of funny, grown-up, funny romantic comedy. And that was 1989. That was only 6 years after The Return of the Jedi. And I think she was only like 32 when she would have filmed When Harry Met Sally. So, or maybe even 31. And again, I've spoken about this before, the way time... I did an episode on this earlier this year about this kind of the elasticity of time and how that space of 6 years... Now, I don't think I saw When Harry Met Sally right then in 1989. Maybe it was 1990, 91 when I saw it. It felt like it was eons since the Star Wars experience. Eons. A different time entirely. But I was still only 16 or 17. But I suppose there's a big difference between 9 and 16 or 17. I mean, certainly if I contemplate what my daughter might be like at those ages in the future, that'll be a young woman as opposed to the little girl that's before me now. I did ask Maeve if she wanted to be interviewed to share her thoughts on Star Wars, and she wasn't interested. She did say that Darth Vader is a cool guy. So she had this affinity for Darth Vader from the very first movie. And when she watched, I'm sure I may have mentioned this before, when she watched Return of the Jedi, she was horrified that Darth Vader died at the end of that. And she built a shrine to Darth Vader in our living room in Melbourne. And she continues to have a soft spot for Darth Vader. And again, I may be repeating myself, but so be it. It does make me worry about the type of men she's going to be interested in, or women, if it works out that way. So I'll be trying to stay in shape. I'm gonna dust off my lightsaber, and I'm just going to jump in there right away. I don't have a lightsaber. Okay? That was a metaphor. Okay? I don't have a lightsaber. I'm in this funny territory where I've never really felt like... and this is a case of methinks the lady doth protest too much. But I've never thought of myself as a nerd, even though I had a foot strongly in the Star Wars camp, even though I had a foot strongly in the comic book camp, by which I mean specifically Marvel Comics, Iron Man and Spider-Man and Captain America, The Thing, the Avengers. I subscribed to, read those comics, loved them in my around that kind of 10, 11, 12, 13 age. And then it passes. But I've retained my affection for those characters, those stories, those worlds. I've retained a certain amount of the knowledge that I devoured and consumed and memorized as a kid. And I didn't have that many. I don't feel like I had really anyone around me that was into that stuff in the same way. And maybe that's why I never really kicked on to be a full comic book nerd or Star Wars nerd. And I've come across those guys. I worked with a teacher in a school down this way before we headed out to Australia in 2010. And we exchanged some graphic novels. Graphic novels. I have a friend of mine who says graphic novels. It's just a pretentious. It's just a pretentious term. They're just comic books. Just call them what they are. I don't know. I like graphic novels. But we exchanged graphic novels or comic books for big boys. And he announced to the staff room that we were kind of brought me in, threw an arm around me. We're nerds. And I was thinking to myself, no, I don't think so, buddy. I was thinking, you're definitely a nerd. I am not. And I'm not sure. I'm just processing it now and trying to think, what is it that makes me so certain I'm not that? And maybe it's a certain, it's tone. It's tone. It's also maybe the level of passion you bring to discussing these things. Now, I don't feel I've been particularly passionate during this episode, but there's a level of conviction and passion that the true nerd brings to how they speak about these characters and these worlds. They speak about these characters like they are deities. They speak about these worlds like they are, they are sacred texts. They are gospel. And I simply don't feel that way as much as I love those characters. Love, don't know. I mean, I do. I love, I was even considering sitting down to watch the first Star Wars movie again for this episode, just to refire my juices, my enthusiasm. And I realised I don't need to. I remember every beat of that story. I remember the fear I had when our heroes were in the trash compactor on the Death Star. And when I watched that in the cinema, and I was so afraid for them. It felt so terrifying. It felt so real. I cared. And that's the thing. Like, that is the thing. Successful stories. And particularly for that type of story, you've got to care about the characters, to go on the journey, to invest. And so when everyone was raving about Harry Potter, I couldn't go there. I just couldn't go there. I felt, no, we had the Narnia books. If you're looking for a bit of fantasy, I'll go back and read the Narnia Chronicles. Different again. I can hear Pepper, the dog, barking outside. Don't know what that's about. It might be the podcast police coming to tell me to wrap this one up. Yeah. Again, I'm trying to come back into, to wrap this episode up this evening, tonight, because I'm recording this at night, a couple of hours before the episode comes out. I suppose, which is my way of saying I'm trying to think, or this is the beginning of an idea, the beginning of a theory. When I think of this idea then, of being young and connecting powerfully with fictional characters, and as I did with Star Wars characters, as I did with the aforementioned Narnia characters when I read those books, I found that world captivating, the stories captivating, Aslan captivating. Now, I'm aware now that particularly Aslan, Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, that was Christian allegory, and that cools me on it somewhat as an adult who is an atheist, who doesn't believe in a higher power, who doesn't believe in God. And reading The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe as a kid didn't make me think of God or the resurrection or the Christ story. But I think innocence is the fertile soil out of which that connection and resonance grows, or it's the fertile soil in which the imagination thrives, and how those stories can inspire such emotion and devotion, such intensity of feeling. I really do think innocence, and I don't want to say naivety. I mean, I really mean innocence in that so little of the world has been discovered, so little of ourselves has been discovered, and we are the tabula rasa. Is that the correct pronunciation? The blank slate, onto which things may be inscribed. We are the receiving screen. We are the receiving thing into which these vivid creations can be poured or etched or embossed, embedded. And that certainly makes sense to me. And I was definitely a kid who was alive to the possibility of attractive human beings. And and I don't mean from a purely aesthetic point of view, although that often could have been in the mix, but alive to the possibility of slightly heroic figures walking amongst us, and the act of heroism might simply have been to be nice, to be light, to be breezy, to be sunny, to show interest, to carry themselves in a certain way with a certain energy, to have a natural cool, a natural allure, and to be attractive in that way as a person. I definitely think that was on my radar, not consciously, but if I think back, I feel subconsciously I was responding to people in a certain way. Like certain people I'd responded differently, and maybe I was projecting things onto them. And of course, something in me at a young age, the nascent fantasist, performer, actor, role player, of course. And again, I am in no way exceptional, and this does not just live in the world of Star Wars. I mean, this is any of us as kids, and the characters that we respond to, the characters that resonate with us, the characters that maybe we wish we were capable of being, the defiant, wisecracking, fearless anti-hero type, a la Han Solo, in the Star Wars movies. I mean, Harrison Ford. I mean, really, as I get older, I realize that a lot of screen actors, particularly a certain type of American screen actor, all they're doing is bringing themselves to the screen. They're just bringing themselves to the role, and their natural thing is what we respond to. Like Christopher Walken, or like Harrison Ford, Marlon Brando, perhaps. I mean, Marlon Brando could, he could get lost a bit in his, in what he would try on. I mean, I don't know how much of himself was in Fletcher Christian in the Mutiny on the Bounty, like that accent. But maybe if you see Brando in On the Waterfront, you see Brando in Streetcar, and there's something undisguisably him, that sensuality. Now, Harrison Ford had that kind of vulnerability, that slightly wounded thing always underneath the bravado. That was kind of his superpower, I felt, the vulnerability. Walken, I mean, these are just the guys that came in my head. Like Walken's quirk, his strange syncopation, that's him. Like, that's his. You see him in interviews, like it's like, oh my goodness, this guy. I don't know. Anyway, so there you go. Wasn't that brilliant? I'm not going to talk about Star Wars much, and now I've just taken the whole bloody episode talking about Star Wars, and I'm going to have the audacity to release it as this week's episode. But hopefully you don't have to be a Star Wars fan to have chimed with what I've spoken about. And sure, look, if you are a Star Wars fan, great. You might find fault with my analysis, if it even passes for analysis. But that's it. I'm going to leave it there. And I'm pleased. I didn't have to resort to throwing up something that was pre-recorded. These have been my thoughts on the world and characters created by George Lucas. You should, if you haven't seen it, you should seek out. There is a great documentary about the making of Star Wars and how unbelievably shy and awkward George Lucas was. And the tension that created on the set. It was filmed in Shepperton Studios, wasn't it? I mean, there's an awful lot of lore around Star Wars and the making of that, of the movie, and getting the finance and the success and the first impressions of George Lucas's peer group. Spielberg, he could see what it was meant to be, and others were less convinced. But George Lucas had the last laugh, and George Lucas, of course, very canny operator. He saw, and I didn't speak about this, and I meant to. He saw the opportunity with the merchandising, and of course that was a bloody huge part of it. And I forgot to mention this. Of course, I had the Star Wars figures. I loved the Star Wars figures. I loved the spaceships. I loved anything I could get my hands on that was part of the Star Wars universe. And I had a reasonable collection, not extensive. I had friends who seemed to have everything, and I was quite envious. But I had my own stuff, and I made my own spaceships, and I played out in the back field behind the house, and created little worlds for the characters to play in. And for one birthday, it may have been my 10th, I was given a shoulder bag, a Star Wars shoulder bag that had a photo on it from The Empire Strikes Back of Yoda and Luke Skywalker in the swamp. I'm still trying to dig the name of Yoda's planet out of my head, but it's not coming. So I have failed, and there you go. I failed. I failed the nerd test, or I've passed the nerd test, depending on which way you want to look at it. That's like sorry, how they tried to determine whether a woman was a witch or not back in the day. If you drown, you're a witch. If you drown, you're not a witch. And if you don't drown, we're going to kill you for being a witch. Isn't that one of those kind of... I don't even know what you call those tests. That wasn't a test. I mean, that was basically a form of execution. So my nerd test, because I can't think of the name of that planet, it shows that I'm not a nerd. But now the nerds will kill me, maybe, for not being a nerd. I'm not sure. Okay. I loved though. One of the things I loved about those Star Wars figures, I loved how they smelled. I loved the smell. I loved the smell of a Star Wars figure. Whatever they did to that plastic, I can smell it now. And somehow the black plastic was particularly pungent, aromatic, just beautiful. Beautiful. So there you go. I don't have a fetish or anything. But if you want to send me a Star Wars figure, I wouldn't say no. I don't have any. They all got passed down to my brothers and were eventually, buried under sand or run over or destroyed or eaten by dogs or thrown in bins. I bought my daughter some cheap, really dodgy, really not very proportional Chinese versions of the Star Wars characters, and they all had little red laser lights in their chests. They were truly crap. But I mean, even now they say it, I don't know what I was thinking. My daughter did enjoy them. But anyway, I've just made myself nostalgic for Star Wars stuff. Right. documentary on the making of Star Wars. Seek that one out. It's probably on YouTube, the way lots of these things are, but that's well worth a watch. Fascinating stuff. Just look it up. You'll find stuff. There'll be loads of stuff online about this if you're interested. I'm done. As always, you can throw me some love on social media using the links that are there wherever you're listening to this episode. That would be YouTube and Instagram, Twitter. What am I not thinking of? Did I say Instagram? Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Is that it? Yeah, you can tell I'm not well. I can't even think. Patreon.com/The Clear Out. The supporter link on Acast. There are lots of ways. Share, subscribe, comment, rate, whatever you like. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll be back next week in full health with a clearer voice, and I'll look forward to talking to you then. Okay, take care. All the best. Mind yourselves. Bye.